We're here in Rubber Walker's wonderful survey of the last 15 years of work. And the show is called Rebus, which I understand is a
computer-generated word.
Yeah. So it kind of, yeah?
Well, I was pressed for a title and we had to get the catalog published, and I just turned on the computer-generated word.
Well, it suggests the kind of ineffable quality of a lot of your work. And,
I was hoping.
I think you've had a very quiet practice making abstract art in Los Angeles for the last 40 years, and it's great to see the work kind of come to consciousness in this show. Just wondered if you could say a little bit about your background. You grew up in Los Angeles.
I'm a native. I was born in Santa Monica. I grew up in a doctor's family. My grandfather was a surgeon and essentially my father figure. And I was a pre-med student all the way through college. I mean, there weren't really options in my family. You were going to be a doctor, and then you could do whatever you wanted to do.
Right.
But I was always interested in art.
Were you exposed to art as a kid?
My grandmother took me to what was then the only art venue in LA, which is the Natural History Museum, as I remember.
Right, the old, before Lockman.
Right, so that was about it. I mean, we never traveled. So it was really just my own interest in it and looking at the library. So no influences in my family at all.
And so after undergraduate, you switched to literature for a while.
I was dodging the Vietnam War. Those were the years where you would do anything you could to get out of it. I had a cousin who went into the military at that time, and he was 18 and he was dead within 2 weeks. So that really stuck in my mind, and I was not going, to go to Vietnam. So at that time, if you pursued a graduate degree, you could avoid the draft.
Right.
So I worked on a degree in literature, and the only reason I didn't get an MA in literature was I couldn't pass the German test. But then about that time I turned 26, and that's when I went to art school.
And this was University of California at Irvine.
That's right.
And you were in the first graduating class.
First graduating class.
Which was a kind of stellar moment.
It was a great moment. I mean, it was really an innovative program.
Right.
It kind of gave you carte blanche to do whatever you wanted to do.
Start off with carte blanche.
Yeah, I heard that car.
Okay. Irvine at that time sort of gave you an open credit card to do whatever you wanted to do. Right. Larry Bell was a teacher, and I remember, the semester started and we kept waiting to hear from him, okay, we're going to have a meeting, and nothing. And
he didn't show up?
Didn't do anything.
Oh, God.
And so one of the students was getting a little upset about it, and she called him and said, well, tell me what you want to do. I'll do anything you want me to do.
Right.
But he didn't give us that information. You had to have the impetus to seek him out, and some of us were going, oh, come on.
I see. But some of the other students there were Chris Burden and Nancy Buchanan, performance artists. Barbara Smith was heavy in performance.
Very heavy in performance.
But you were pursuing painting.
I was making painting. I did participate in some of Nancy's performances.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, they were her concept and her pieces.
Sure.
So,
But you mentioned to me Alan Serrett, the New York artist, was visiting.
He did visit.
Yeah. And this work, which relates to a lot of the work you did right after graduate school. And can you explain the process of this a little bit?
This is made out of nylon netting, and I dip it in a plastic, which is called methyl metaculate, which was a dental supply material.
Oh, really?
And I managed to find that. At that time, my partner was a dentist, and he, helped me come up with this. And I worked with a knitting mill in the South, and they produced over 4,000 different, kinds of knitting. I mean, it's a big industry from little tiny beekeeping. This was, the era of process art, and I was really interested in, what you could do to it. And also, they were soft, and it was sort of a rejection of the minimalist strictures at that time.
This would be the 70s, right?
It was the 70s and the 80s. The first ones were all monochromatic. This is really a fairly recent piece. You go back and you revisit. So I did put the mandala in it.
It's fascinating to see this kind of work come out of such a conceptually based graduate program.
It was very conceptually based.
The artists that were sort of in the air that related to your work would be like Robert Irwin.
Bob Irwin was a big influence.
Larry Bell, Craig Kaufman,
Right.
those kinds.
Tony DeLapp. Irwin was one of those sort of magical people that,
Right.
time with him was remarkable.
Right.
So I think everybody felt
Yeah.
that.
This is a piece from the year 2002 called Paraquat.
Paraquat.
And it's the earliest piece in this show. And I know that there's a backstory to this. This was a new technique that you had developed coming out of the older body of work. Can you first talk about how you make something this complex and this amazing technique that you're using?
It's essentially painters applied or extruded through a syringe. And I don't exactly remember how I derived that, but I did have, when my grandfather died, who was a surgeon, I had his medical equipment, and I hung on to it. So there were all of these syringes around, and I was trying to figure out a way to do something with the paint. And I've always been interested in the dichotomy between what is a painting and a sculpture.
Right.
And technically, because of the density of this, it's almost like a bas relief. I just began to apply the paint with a syringe, and then they got bigger.
And these are syringes that were used for...
I got them from a veterinary supply company, and they were these great big. And by the time I made a whole show of this work, I had terrible tendinitis. But you would just squeeze it out, one color.
And you're applying them on top of each other?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Put them out on a big table, and I would run along, and then I would have to let one layer dry, so you kept building it up. And then I would have to piece the composition together, so I knew that I could put the panels together.
And how are you modulating color? Just intuitively?
With difficulty. Great difficulty. And the imagery, this is called Paraquat, because that was just this terribly toxic material they started to use in the 50s and 60s.
It's an herbicide, right?
It is an herbicide.
Yeah.
And they were spraying the marijuana with it in the early 70s,
Oh my God.
which was coming into the U.S. from Mexico.
Wow.
And I was just interested in how, the violence we were doing to the environment. But I had specifically had some health issues from using toxic materials.
That you were doing in your previous body of work.
Right.
And those were health issues with breathing and lungs?
Specifically. I lost about 30% of my lung capacity from working, in the materials. I was interested in that. It was the first time I really directly took my own experience and put it into the work.
Very subtly, there's a shape of a cell.
It's a cellular structure of Paraquat. And the pollutants to the air and all of these things are invisible to the human eye, so I wanted you to become engaged and look at it. And the titles would tell you what they were. I did a small series of what I called hard drawings because they were on resin. And they were images of respirators and everything I had to use to make the work.
And could you speak a little bit about your notion of paint as an object? Because a lot of abstract painters have deconstructed the basic materials, canvas, frames, etc. But I think you're one of the rare painters who really has taken on the objectivity of paint, presenting it as an object that can be squeezed and touched and felt there.
Well, I think I was really interested in that process of, what you did with it, not specifically how you made it, but what you did with the material. And it was when, people were doing things like throwing lead, and the felt, and, Linda Benglis was pouring and all of that. And I tried everything I could. I put the material in the microwave, and I did a lot of different things with it, but I was interested in the materiality of the medium. Right. And what I could do to push the ends of that.
But your works, they're definitely reliefs, but they, to me...
It is a painting.
Yeah.
I know they do.
They relate to abstract expressionism and minimalism in a really, fascinating way to make those to kind of concretize aspects of both of those movements.
But when you look at it, you can see the movement of the paint, and it's the repetition of the linear lines. And I've always loved repetition, and I think it's been just kind of hardwired in my brain.
Right.
Accumulation, repetition.
Well, it certainly comes out in your incredible process, which must be amazingly exhausting. So the next piece we're going to talk about is called Magic Show, this diptych here, and it has it follows on the process that Robert was using before, but he made it he sort of developed the process into something quite amazing. And we have a sample of how this piece was put together. And can you explain what that is in your hand?
So this shows the extruded, acrylic, which came out of a syringe. So I would lay it out, and then I would, after many layers dried, and I had the different colors, I would roll it up like a sushi roll.
Yeah, show that.
And then I would slice it very, painfully. So essentially, what you're getting in this piece is the cross section of the little individual, strands or threads of acrylic.
So it's thousands and thousands of tubular pieces of acrylic paint.
Right.
And in this diptych, each one has concentric circles in blue. So it's difficult to see, but it's so subtle.
It's taking the individual little circle of the paint and then multiplying it. And then, you go from that to this and then to the big circles. So I just kept going with the idea of the circle. And it was about this time that I was beginning to make and draw a lot of mandalas.
You had started traveling to Southeast Asia.
I did. Asia and Southeast Asia, but I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia.
And you became interested in philosophy and religion?
I think my interest in Eastern religion started when I was really young. My family were these devout Seventh-day Adventists, and I was just going, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I began reading, and I became really interested in anything other than that.
Right. Right.
And so I had always been interested in it, and I started meditation when I was in my 30s. So it had been a part of my practice. And then, then it just sort of transitioned to this.
Well, to have a process this complex and time-consuming is a meditative act itself, right?
Yeah, it's almost art as a performed meditation.
Right.
It really is.
Right. And there were only a few pieces you made with this technique because it was just so time-consuming.
I did probably 6 or 8 small ones, and then I did a big one. It was for a show in Tokyo at the time, and then Solway Jones here in LA showed some of those.
Right.
Too.
But I think, you can really see in this piece your differentiation from the light and space people of LA and Finish Fetish. You're after something else.
Something very different.
Something within the paint or within the art object itself. So this next piece is called Good Radar from 2007. And so here you've developed a new technique. And can you explain what you're doing here with these strips of acrylic that are individually striated in a really complex way? It's fascinating.
Essentially it's layering the acrylic out. I would generally do about a section about that thick, and you have to let one layer dry and you build it up. And then I would slice it very thin, and then I would put these, building the vortex, I would put them in, going in that way. So it's very labor intensive, and this was the first of these I did, and I called them carved acrylic, only because I was cutting and doing all of those things to it. I love this in particular because of the handcrafted quality of it. And, I went directly from grad school in literature and then a pre-med background, and I went to art school never having taken a drawing class or a sculpture class. So, I was really drawn to, techniques that didn't require that. I mean, I went back and learned them later. I needed to, but at that time I didn't really have them. So I wasn't going to paint like Vermeer, and nobody was at that time anyway. But this one really does speak to the handcrafted quality. And, it also speaks of the feminist influence at that time. So many artists were, adopting the techniques of that. And I love that handcrafted quality. So.
Yeah, no, it's got a real human touch to it.
Right.
I'm curious about how you compose the elements, because as you stare at it, one starts to see the blue as a kind of organizing structure. And were you just doing it intuitively, or were there?
I didn't have a systematic approach to the color of it.
Right.
But I would make enough of, say, the blue, for instance, to put them around, and then I began to build with other patterns, and then it was just all intuitively what it looked like. But somehow drawn to the vortex. It's one of those archetypes that's just, I can't get away from it. It's the, it's Dorothy down the rabbit hole, or in Hinduism, it's supposed to be a door to a higher level of spiritual world.
Right.
But I do love the vortex.
But it's also in your work throwing out that concept of flatness that was so much a part of the rhetoric of the 1950s and 60s painting.
Right.
And here you have depth of field, and you're really falling into the work in a really compelling way, an unavoidable way.
Late 15th century theories in those drawings.
Yeah.
I always loved those, so this is a takeoff on that as well.
So this is the Siem Reap suite, which you've worked on for about 10 years at various times.
The big piece and a few small ones were made about 10 years ago, and then every once in a while I would keep, making a few more, and they got more complex. Essentially it is made out of the layers of acrylic, so it's all acrylic. And I used a pencil sharpener on these, and it's like it's that fascination of model making when you were a kid. I loved all of that stuff.
And Siem Reap is the area in Cambodia where Angkor Wat and the other temples are.
There are dozens of temples.
Where you visited a number of times, or
yeah, I did.
Yeah, you spent more time in Cambodia than other Southeast Asian countries?
My then partner Gary was teaching there, so we had a house in Phnom Penh, which is the capital, and he was teaching in a monastery, teaching English. So I would go over on my, winter breaks, summer breaks, and join him there. It was primarily the architecture and the temples in Cambodia and Thailand both. But, the vision, the two-dimensional work was not that impressive to me at that time, but this work really was. And essentially, when I began making the mandalas, these are technically a three-dimensional mandala. Temples, pagodas, stupas, whatever you want to call them in the different cultures, but they all serve the same function. So it was just making that, and it's the labor and the intensity of it that really did appeal to me, and it's gratifying to me. I wouldn't do it if it, didn't.
Right. Well, do you feel like you're sort of honoring paint itself, or in making temples of paint?
When I first made these, I intended to have them very close to a painting like Good Radar because it informed how I made them. I really was a technique of cutting and carving. And I intended that, and originally, I think I had 80. I was pushing for 100, but they were all arranged in different...
You mean 80 of these components?
Yeah, at the different,
Oh, okay.
different ones.
Yeah.
You know, these are the ones that are remaining, or I held back and didn't. I think they work better. I mean, I love this one, and I'm not selling it because of the mass of it.
Right. Yeah. No, it just intrigues me, the idea that there's no entry point to these temples. They're solid objects unto themselves, and
I've never thought of it that way.
and objects for contemplation or inspiration or something.
Well, I mean, they do extend, the process of meditation into a three-dimensional, and they're walking meditations, which I participated in Cambodia. So it was walking through them. You're supposed to, take the mind off the world, get someplace else.
Right. So this is the last piece we're going to talk about, Mothership 3.0. It's from your most recent body of work. And you can see that you've come a long way from your minimalist roots.
Yes, I have.
In this very crazy all-over swirls and with a vortex happening in the center. But you have a new technique here of ornamenting the individual acrylic strands.
That's right.
And I wonder how you decided to do that and where that kind of came from.
I think it falls in that category of I can't help myself. I've always loved pattern and decoration. I loved it, but I never was comfortable putting it into my own work. And finally, now in my 70s, it was like, what the hell? And it was in Cambodia that I began to do a series of drawings that were the origin of this work. And the swirls are, joy wheels, wind wheels, fire, but they're redolent in any Eastern representation, particularly Buddhist. And I think when you walk into some of the really big Buddhist temples and you see the kind of amazing activity of what is going on there, it reminded me of that. And I think also, the vortex here served only as a personal metaphor for the chaos of my mind and trying to get centered.
I think it's fascinating that it's not a pattern, but a sort of organic set of swirls that takes the viewer's eye all over the place, and then you're being jerked or drawn into the center of the thing through those graphic lines at the same time. And the exuberance of it, people think of meditation as being the solemn act, but I wonder if that's if the exuberance is another aspect of it for you.
I think as I began to explore that kind of art, I realized that the illustration of it was very exuberant. And the practice of the religion in the temples is incredibly exuberant. My background was so rigid and so spare and so puritanical that I was just wildly attracted to it. And I finally just said, what the hell?
Yeah.
And, let it go. So, yeah, that's my own experience. It's my own personal experience. So I just applied these techniques.
Right.
And they became very personal.
Well, I think it's fantastic to see an artist letting go and letting themselves have that sort of sense of joy and spirit in their work, especially given the rigid ups and downs of abstract art over the decades. To see that abstract art can still have its own kind of unique look with a unique technique, one that hasn't really been explored by other artists, and that takes abstraction into kind of a new realm of visual excitement. So.
Oh, thank you. No, I hope so.
Yeah.